everyone. It's Thursday, May 14, 2020. It's 7:01 p.m. and we are starting our Facebook Live. I'm super excited to have a special guest with us discussing one of the hottest topics that is the talk of town for today. I am Christina Malyan from Malyan Law. I practice in personal injury and estate planning. My office is located in Glendale, California. But today's guest is a very special guest, a defense attorney who's been practicing for over 15 years. He was a former LA County public defender. With that said, I want to introduce our guest, Lucia Pirro, who's also a certified specialist in criminal law. Hi, Lou. How are you?
Good. I'm waiting to hear the fake applause. They haven't come on yet.
Yeah, here. Applaud.
There we go.
So thank you so much. This is part of an outreach that I'm trying to do to provide people content during these tough times. And as my Monday's program, which was regarding workers' comp and employment law during COVID, whether or not if you got infected during the job or remotely, has gotten so much feedback, I decided to continue with COVID topic and bring in somebody who is providing not only guidance, but also assistance with regards to the CARES Act. Now, just a brief little commentary. The CARES Act was a federal law that was enacted on March 29, 2020. And essentially, it was designed to provide emergency financial assistance for millions of Americans who were suffering the economic effects caused by COVID-19 pandemic. And Lou actually brought a great topic and conversational piece to me and said, well, Christina, did you know that people could be investigated and audited for applying and actually getting the PPP loan? And it just blew my mind away that during these times, the Department of Justice is actually going to crack down on folks. And that's why we're here tonight. So if you feel like you know somebody, or if you've applied for the PPP loan and have been funded, and this is a topic for you, we urge you to share this content information. It will be posted on Malyan Law and also my YouTube channel, Malyan Law, and we'll go, and you can connect with us at any time. With that said, turning it over to Lou Shapiro, can you please introduce yourself to our audience and let us know a little bit about you before we get started and get into this CARES Act and loans?
Yes, thanks for having me. I hope we can make some of these complicated rules and regulations easy for everybody to understand and grasp on, and just bring certain maybe points that people didn't even think that would be an issue to consider to light. So we're here to be informative, here to be helpful, and also available after this interview to answer follow-up questions, because there's no one size fits all in topics like this.
Yes, of course. And we'll provide everybody with the handles and where we could contact you, or even my office. If you do contact me, I do provide and direct them directly to the attorneys that are commenting or speaking here. So because they are the ones that I consider and I look up to and I refer to. Lou, with that said, without getting into very details, the CARES Act, what happened? What interests you in getting involved on the defense side of the CARES Act?
So when I saw the CARES Act come out, it's about a 300-page bill that went into law. The idea of it all was to help struggling small businesses during a period of when there's really not much going on. And not only that, but to actually help the employees of those businesses stay employed. Because what happens is, even though we know unemployment is out there and helping people, we don't want people to go on unemployment, because if that happens, then they may not have a job waiting for them when the economy sort of picks up. So the purpose of this loan is employees will still get paid, they'll still have their job, and basically everybody's happy in the end. It's a glorified form of unemployment with job security built in, basically.
Okay, so I know the CARES Act provided multiple types of loans, and whether it was the economic impact relief, EIDL for short, or the PPP was designed specifically for payroll purpose, correct? Is that your understanding?
Correct, and that's what we're going to be focusing in on, is the PPP, because that's the one that's really being scrutinized. That's the one that most people took advantage of. And that's where we're going to see probably, prosecution like we already have seen come in on that loan specifically. And we'll talk about those in the interview.
Right. And we'll talk about that prosecution regarding that TV reality star. But before we get into that, I see a lot of people have joined our feed, which is great. Thank you so much. I know this is an important topic, and thank you for taking your Thursday night and coming live with us. So with that said, I'm going to jump straight into it because we are getting questions, Lou.
Let's do it.
So first and foremost, I have a question pending here that says, I applied for the PPP loan with the intent to pay back my employees and bring them back. However, because we've been out for almost close to 3 months, we have not been able to come back, restart, and now I'm worried about the fact that I may not even have enough payroll to cover. Is this something that I should be alarmed with, the audits and the investigations that you guys are speaking of?
All right, great question. So there's two components to this PPP process. One is the application part. We'll call it part one.
Okay.
And the other part is the actual usage of the proceeds, of the loan proceeds, how the money is used. That's part two. And I think that part one is really going to be more of an issue when it comes to the criminal sector rather than part two. In other words, if somebody in part one, if they falsify facts on their loan application claiming that they have a certain amount of employees when they don't, just to get more money, that's going to be a big problem because you're certifying under oath one thing and really when there's something else going on.
Okay, let's stop right there. Two parts. All right,
Sure.
We'll break it down. You'll guide me through it because this is news to me, obviously. Part one, application process. What is your biggest fear regarding the application process? What are they looking for? What's the talk of town?
They're looking for fictitious companies, right? Companies that just don't even exist, people making up names for companies that are just nowhere. In addition to that, several employees on a payroll that also doesn't exist.
But how
So
would
that's
how would one be able to do that? I mean, not to get into a colluding conversation, but it's just some people are doctoring or fabricating documents. Like, what is the situation?
so the application to get this loan was actually very simple. All you needed to send your lender was 5 or 6 documents. A lot of it was just fill in the blank and check off boxes. Only really 1 or 2 tax documents were required, and they consist of 2 or 3 pages. One could easily fudge those numbers in terms of what their payroll is and what they paid last year in terms of their payroll up until now.
Okay, so it's not necessarily anything, but what about the banks? Are the banks doing any underlying or verification, or the banks are kind of washing their hands and just being a mediator between the funding of the loan and the applicant?
So the banks were actually very hesitant when this first rolled out for that exact reason. There was no clarity if they have immunity, if there's loan fraud. And they went ahead and did it anyways. But the SBA just a couple days ago released about a 20-page supplemental kind of Q&A to these kinds of questions. And one of them is that. And the answer is the banks will not be held accountable if there was loan fraud committed by the applicant.
So, of course, the banks are protected. That's no surprise anywhere, whether it's a civil or criminal matter. But okay, with regards to the step number 1, 2-step process you were mentioning, what else are, if anything, do you fear that might cause or trigger an audit or investigation?
So the SBA just said that anyone who got a loan, this PPP loan of $2 million or more, they're going to be audited. They're going to be scrutinized. So we already know there's a threshold for who's going to for sure be audited and who might not be. So anyone below that 2 million, they very well may not be audited unless the government sees very suspicious activity. Because remember, the government only has, even though they are the government, they only have limited resources in terms of prosecuting and having investigative agents on all this. We're talking about money, right, that went to all over the U.S. So
Right.
You can't have enough prosecutors to track down $1 trillion. It's It
Unless we
doesn't
decide
fly.
to change careers and work for the DOJ, but we'll get into that.
Right.
So I
Right.
know your experience with dealing with white collar crime, essentially what we're dealing with, right? So the charges, or what we're talking about today for today's topic, everybody, is the fact that you can be audited, investigated, and the charges that are coming are white collar crime charges, bank fraud, wire fraud, fraudulent applications. Now, the threshold. What do you know why why the 2 million is dictating, or has there been any conversation with regards to why they chose the 2 million number or anything like that?
They haven't said why, but the inference is that it makes it worth their while. Anything below, it's just not a cost-effective use of resources. The government is in effect in these cases acting like an asset recovery company, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you will. So it has to just make sense financially.
Okay, and then the second process you were saying, so there's a two-step process, which the first process is the one that we're worried about, the criminal charges. What about the second one?
So part two, in terms of, so let's say somebody puts the truth in their loan application. They get the money, but then it turns out that maybe it's still not enough to cover payroll, or they're going under for other reasons, and then the money is not used for payroll. What will happen then? Will the government prosecute in part two? My forecast is that they probably will not, so long as the loan recipient can show that they made a good faith effort to use the funds for the purpose that they were given.
Okay.
All that will happen is it will convert to a loan at a 1% interest rate, which will be paid back. If it's not paid back, then there may be other trouble as a result.
So before we get into that, and I think that went directly to my first question, or first question that came from the audience was, what
Correct.
if the intent was payroll purpose, but then for business purposes, I wasn't able to keep and hold on to my employees, and now I have to use it for other expenses? Is the inference or understanding that this has to be used for some legitimate business practice and not for personal use or personal gain?
Yes, that is the understanding. If somebody takes that money and rather than putting it into their business goes and blows it in Vegas, then they're asking for trouble.
Okay. So I know there was a question that came in, and do you have any guidance with regards to if when that 8-week period kicks in? The question specifically is, I just got news that my loan will be funded tomorrow. However, the past couple of weeks I've been paying out of my business account and trying to hold on to my employees. Can I reimburse myself back for payroll, or does the 8-week kick in from the time I get funding?
So that question has not been answered, but the assumption is that it kicks in from the time of funding.
Okay.
Right? Now, but if it was used before then, I doubt, it's possible, but I doubt they're going to prosecute for that, because it was used for payroll, right? It wasn't like it was used for something else. But right. I think that the idea is it's really during that period moving forward, because that was when it would be anticipated to be needed most. But we all know that businesses that before this PPP loan money came in, people were already hurting for a few weeks. We were all home for a good 3 weeks, I think, by that point.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the spirit of the loan, as long as it's used for payroll, even if it's a few days before or something like that, I think that person would be okay.
Okay, Lou, we have a lot of questions. I think this is, as we anticipated, this is a hot topic. I have a question from a business owner, and she is asking, will they care who is on payroll? Like, for example, new employees versus old employees coming back. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, no, I do. I think as long as it's for payroll, I think the argument can be made by the loan recipient that it was used for the purpose that it was intended. There's what's called the Rule of Lenity. You may remember from law school if it came up, which says that if the law is unclear on a certain point, then it's almost like in baseball, tie goes to the runner. In this case, tie goes to the person who received the loan. They're doing the best they can under the law that's given.
Right.
If there's some ambiguity there, they probably will not be penalized for it.
Okay, very good. Another question that came in on Instagram is somebody asking more for general business practice purpose. And the question is specifically, I have a lot of money in my bank account. and I'm not going to name names or tell you who this is so that it doesn't get too far. If I have a lot of money in my business account, is it a problem? Question mark. Do I need to return the funds? What are the general thoughts about that?
So I presume this person is saying that it almost looks like they don't maybe even need the money that they got from the PPP loan, right? Is that going to the heart of the question?
I think that, I mean, we can talk about a couple of variations. We'll take it from there. The person has a lot of money and they applied and they got the PPP loan. Let's talk about that. What's the issue there? What do you anticipate, the Fed's cracking down on that?
Okay. Well, the issue is when this loan was applied for, you had to certify that you really needed the money to keep the doors going, basically, to keep the lights on.
Okay.
If the person had a lot of money, then it's a question of, well, what constitutes a lot of money, right?
Like you mentioned, it's a $2 million threshold. So if somebody is like a couple of 100,000 in, but they got a couple of 100,000, right? That's that begs the question.
Right. So look, the 2 million threshold is really more about a trigger for auditing. Right. This is more about, if let's say this person got audited, what would happen? I don't think they would be prosecuted for it. I think worst case scenario, they would have to pay it back at a 1%, right, interest, because they are doing everything right in terms of using the loans, applying for the loans. They felt they needed it. They could also make the argument they may have had a lot of money at the time of the loan, but they didn't know 2 months down the line what it would look like, right? Because if you're not bringing in revenue, things can drop and you will need it.
Is there something known or available, like a safe harbor period with regards to these loans coming in, people getting it?
Yes. And so the way it works is, sorry, I'll come back.
I know you're live from the courthouse, but we need you here. So, okay, going back to my question, is there a safe harbor period for these loans?
Yes, the safe harbor period technically expired today, but I think that if somebody wants to give it back in the next few days, I think the government will be very happy to see that money back. I don't think they're going to prosecute someone over a ticky-tack few days.
Well, Lou, do you think that's why Shake Shack and Roots Chris and I don't know which basketball team it was, they returned the money for those reasons?
I think that definitely played into it. I think there was probably some, backdoor discussions between the DOJ and these companies' in-house counsel saying, look, guys, we can do this the nice way, or we can do this the hard way. And frankly, it just flies in the face of what the intention of the PPP was, which is to benefit the small businesses, not the Shake Shacks of the industry.
Right. We have a question. Let me try to see if I could rephrase it. Somebody said, I just applied for PPP and I'm a sole owner of a business. Would I be able to write myself a payroll check?
Okay, so no, it doesn't work that way. That's a whole different scenario. That's more like if you want to, independent contractors, people like that are entitled to get some form of unemployment during this period. That would be the direction to take, perhaps. But yeah, making yourself part of the payroll, that could be a little tricky.
Okay, and we have a question that says, don't you have to certify that you need the money?
Correct. That's what we were going to before. Thank you for who said that. Exactly. That
so
goes to that person who has a lot of.
What's the process of certification, or what was needed in order to certify this?
Again, it goes back to those fill in the blanks you had on the actual PPP application. It just asks these questions like, do you really think you need this money? If you don't have this money, will it be very difficult for you to keep your payroll going? Questions like that are very subjective. Each person may, like I said, they could look at the next month and be like, yeah, maybe I'm okay right now, but I know I'm going to need this in a month. So yeah, I do think I need it.
But we didn't know.
That's why it's very great.
That we're going to have an order in place that we had no definition as to when it's going to expire, correct?
Exactly.
Very nice. Now, so let me kind of just filter through my questions, because we got a lot during during our conversation. Okay. We have, and I know you mentioned part one and part two being that they're going to verify the truth when you get the money, and if you didn't have enough. But the question is, so what should I do if I am afraid I'm going to get audited or investigated? I mean, we can back up a little bit and I can maybe ask you procedurally, do you know how somebody is going to be contacted with relation to any audit or investigation?
There's no like one size fits all on how the government works on these. Sometimes it's just an audit. I mean, they'll send you a letter saying, hey, we want to meet with you. We want to see the records or things like that. Or it could be something where they're doing like an undercover type investigation, which we saw here already. So it runs that whole gamut.
So what do you anticipate with the undercover investigation? Without getting into the details, we'll talk about the TV reality star, but when you say undercover investigations, what are they going to do? Or what do you think they're going to do?
Maybe like follow somebody around, see where they're going, see what kind of cars they're driving, see what transactions they're running, subpoena their credit card, spending account, for that
Way
few
before
months.
providing you any notice, like don't they have to notify me as a consumer and as a borrower that this is happening?
Not if if they get a warrant from a judge, they don't have to do that. Now, after the fact, once someone is charged, obviously you get all the discovery and all that. But now the police, they don't give you a heads up on that kind of stuff. They don't have to.
Right? So, okay, step by step, they investigate somebody who they believe may have lied on their application or may be using the funds for non-payroll purposes or business-related purposes. And if they do that, they'll investigate whatever they do. What's the next step that takes place? Do you get indicted? Do you get a formal charge? Do you get a letter in the mail? Or do you get a knock on the door? Like, what's going to happen? What should the viewers know?
Yeah, usually it would be a grand jury. So jurors would be assembled. It's very easy to indict this would be a federal case. So that's why it goes to a grand jury versus a state case, which doesn't. And then someone is indicted, they're brought to court. I think on these cases, most people will be released with some form of collateral while the case is pending. I don't think people are going to be remanded to custody immediately on these. They may be looking at custody at the end of the case, but I think they'll be able to get out. And frankly, this is why I formed the CARE Act defense group, which is comprised of me, a tax attorney, and a forensic accountant. Because depending on where the government starts first, any of us three will jump in and start at that point.
Is that because there might be some civil penalties as well, or just criminal penalties and charges?
Exactly. It could be civil or criminal. That's what the Act provides. So we want to have all bases covered.
But courts are closed, right? I mean, should we just be relaxed about the fact that this is not going to happen until courts open? Or what is your thoughts on if they would be prosecuted or indicted while the courts are quote unquote closed, but we know that it's open for some exigent circumstances?
Right. So if someone's indicted, then they are arraigned, and that arraignment proceeding would qualify under an exigent circumstance type hearing. So that hearing would take place. However, the case itself would probably be around for a lot longer because of the slam docket in the criminal process right now. There's just so many cases that are getting continued. The new ones are even going to get pushed out further, probably.
Right. Terrible. Okay. So they get indicted. They plead hopefully not guilty. What's the next step? Do they contact an attorney or should they do this by themselves?
I think you know what I'm going to say. But no, they definitely need to contact counsel. The feds are not ones you don't want to play with fire, especially with the federal government. So definitely,
during these hard times, the purpose of the money and the funding was to help the economy, not to fund your personal lavish lifestyle.
Right. No, that's and the government's made an example already of a few individuals who have done that. And they say that anyone who inappropriately diverts these critical funds for their own personal gain will be prosecuted.
Wow. Okay. Let's back up a little bit. You formed a group with, you said you yourself, a criminal defense attorney, an accountant, tax advisor?
Right. So a forensic accountant, David Goldbahar, and Stephen Chung, who is a tax attorney.
Okay.
And we actually have the website careactdefense.com.
And we'll definitely plug that into our feed, careactdefense.com. The purpose of doing that is to get a multi-level expert for lack of better terms, view on what's going on to have a good handle of it. Now, what charges do you anticipate somebody coming down with, if a violation of, lying, besides fraud? But like, I know we've talked about bank fraud, wire fraud. Can you please give us more insight about that?
Right. That's really what it will be, bank fraud and wire fraud. And then
Why
it's a
wire
question of,
fraud? Why do we say wire fraud?
wire fraud is interesting. It's the catch-all charge that the federal government has over anyone. Because if you think about it, most financial crimes are using the bank system, whether it's a check, credit card. So any transaction, this is what wire fraud is defined as, basically any transaction that's done for a criminal type of purpose, where the banking system is used, any of those means, that falls under wire fraud. We think of wire as you have to wire somebody funds in commission of a crime. That's not what it means, or the legal definition is any use of the bank system. Because we all know the bank, and it's just called wire fraud as a, just a slang.
Okay, but
so that's why this would be
bank fraud. Is there any difference, or that it's just, we'll put everything in the kitchen sink and call it whatever it is?
It's exactly what you said. It's especially when we were talking about the federal government, when they come at people, they come hard.
Any other charges that you anticipate?
No, really, that's what it will be. And then on top of that, though, in terms of how much time someone is looking at, its sentencing will be based on how much they tried to take from the government or how much they took. That's where the guideline range comes into play.
Sure.
Called the
I'm going
loss
to get
amount.
to the sentencing in a little bit, but I want to kind of, take a moment and talk about white collar crime. We don't hear that many times, and we don't think about it, but it's very heavily defended and prosecuted. So I want to get some insight from you with regards to white collar crimes. Like, what have you experienced, or what is your experience with white collar crime?
Sure. So the big difference between blue collar crime and white collar crime, blue collar crime is like the DUIs, domestic violence, thefts, drug offenses, things that happen on a local level. White collar crime, we get into what's called federal court, and that's crime that's happening over state lines. That's usually involving financial means or gains. So money laundering, tax evasion, drug trafficking, people using Bitcoin in the dark web for those types of things. Healthcare fraud is part of white collar fraud. That when let's say a nursing home or a pharmacy is unlawfully billing Medicare for treatments that never happened, for patients that were never in the facility, that falls under white collar crime. So
or
this
excessive CPT billing and the medical codes, violating medical codes, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay, so those are white collar crimes. Blue collar crimes, we know it's your traffic routine stop crimes, but and I think we'll talk about one of those at the end of the program. But moving on, so you get charged, you get indicted, you go through the process, and without getting into the details of the process, if one is convicted, and I don't know if the sentencing is going to be different for part 1 and part 2 stages that you were referring to earlier in our conversation, what do you anticipate the sentencing to be? And is there going to be a difference in sentencing depending on what type of crime one is being convicted of?
Yes. I think, first of all, restitution is going to be a huge part of this.
So
payback. Whether you're being prosecuted under part 1 or part 2, pay it back. You'll be in a much better position at sentencing.
Okay.
And then moving past that, I think part 1 the people that lied on their loan application, made up companies that don't exist and so forth, I think they're going to be looking at more severe punishment than the part 2s, the people that maybe misused the funds, didn't use them as were expected to be. And then we turn to the federal sentencing guidelines. There's a table that judges refer to. It's not mandatory, but it's advisory. But most judges use this table. And you basically take, you can even Google this. If you Google loss amount fraud, white collar crimes, there's a corresponding number. For example, like if it's 1.5 million, that brings you to add 16 points on the underlying offense level. So let's say the offense level for bank fraud is 6. You do 6 which is the offense level, plus the loss amount, which is 16. So that's 22. You plug 22 on your sentencing guidelines table, and that will take somebody down. And sorry, I'm looking up. I'm just looking at that screen here. It'll take you to about 4 to 5 years,
Okay,
potentially in custody.
Where can somebody find that? Can you let me know again?
Sure. So somebody just also gonna have to Google is United States Federal Sentencing Guidelines table.
Got it.
And it's an XY access table that comes up.
Do you anticipate any plea bargains or any conversations that you may have with the federal prosecutor, and your thoughts about that? I mean, from previous experience, I know we're in a new zone and this is one of its, novelty, but do you anticipate any discussions prior to sentencing?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, in any case, there's always going to be a back and forth between the defense attorney and the AUSA in terms of trying to agree on a sentencing range, on what should be a fair deal and outcome and so forth. We actually have sort of seen this before. You may remember they're analogizing this to 2008. If you remember the mortgage industry, where people were taking out loans that they couldn't pay back, and the lenders, actually, the mortgage brokers, were participating in the fraud as well.
Right.
So both the borrowers and the lenders on the ground level were being prosecuted. So, and that was prosecuted heavily. I still had a case involving that only a few years ago. It wasn't that long ago. Yeah. So we're thinking that this could be the revival of that type of prosecution that they did in the mortgage industry during the bubble.
Makes sense. I know I had a conversation with one of the former state bar attorneys, and her anticipation was something like the loan mod, the frauds, everything that came up with that wave of the market crash. So yeah, we're definitely going to see some stuff. I have a question here, and I think it was a follow-up to one of the discussions we had earlier, and they're saying that if somebody made up a company just to apply for the loan, and they colluded or they conversed or they have friends that were part of it, do you anticipate shifting of liability? And if so, your thoughts about that? Is that clear?
Yeah, that's a case where you could have multiple defendants being indicted, and then what happens is everyone is called jointly and severably liable. Everyone's got to pay up a piece of the pie on that.
So paying up the piece of the pie is one thing, but what about the sentencing? How do you divide that between a couple of culpable individuals?
Right. So they each would be looking at sentencing for what's, the amount that corresponds to the table. So it wouldn't be like if one person would get 2 years, then each person gets a quarter of that.
0.5,
Everyone would be
1 year.
Right. Yeah.
I have kids. I have to stay home. You can go do your time. So everybody probably would get if the sentencing comes down, it'd be across the board. Restitution-wise, it probably would be divided. Are there going to be any penalties tacked on to the money that was borrowed or given and not used and prosecuted for? Or is it up to the amount that was borrowed or given?
I think it would just be up to the amount that was given. And I think the government will be happy to even get that much back. I think a lot of people who were, had to, resort to this will not be able to pay a lot of it back. And that's where they're going to run into trouble at sentencing.
Great. And I'm just going to clue our viewers, because we have multiple people joining in. Thank you so much. We are talking about the PPP loans under the CARES Act. If you are a business owner or an individual and that you applied for it, the questions you should be asking yourself is, will you be audited? Did you provide any information that may be suspicious or could cause an audit or investigation? So we have Lou Shapiro, criminal defense attorney. He's a certified specialist in criminal law, here today with us for tonight's program discussing that. So I welcome everybody who just recently joined. Thank you so much. I want to move on and ask a lot more questions that's come in. Lou, there's a question that says the 75 for payroll and the 25% for mortgage and utilities ratio still stands? Is that still, I know this is changing constantly, but is that your understanding? It's 75-25?
Yes, that is still that's where it's at.
Okay, perfect. Now, Any practice points or best practices that you might recommend to business owners who did receive the funds? For example, should they deposit the money into their current operating account where everything's going in and out and they have a lot of line item to do? Or would you recommend somebody having a separate account just to keep everything clean and clear?
You know, a separate account sounds good and nice. I don't think most people are doing it or expected to do it. But the most important thing to do is, though, be able to make sure that you're using the money for payroll, that you can account for it if you're audited, and you're not firing employees once you get the PPP loan, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Follow-up question, Lou, to the one that the 75-25. They said question for Lou. Do you anticipate the ratio regulation being changed?
I don't. I think that's people basically were borrowing under that assumption.
Yeah.
So that should stay. Now, do I think that, look, if someone doesn't stick to exactly 75%, and it's 80%, 80-20 or something like that, I don't think they're going to be prosecuted necessarily.
Okay.
But I think it's all about due diligence, doing the best you can.
Lou, I have a question that came in just right now, and the question is specifically, the intent was, I guess this goes back to a former discussion, but I'll ask it for our newer audience. We've applied for the PPP loan, and we are in process of receiving it within the next few days. However, we also may not use the loan for payroll purpose, but we will use it for a business purpose. If that is the case, should I fear an audit or investigation or any charges, given the fact that I may use it to handle some other business matter, and I completely understand the fact that I need to pay it back at an interest rate and that it's not going to be forgiven? Or should I call you to consult and figure this out?
I think just pay it back. If it's so obvious that you don't need it, you're not going to use it for the reasons why it was given, just arrange, contact the SBA or the bank, the lender, and say, no, I want to get this money back over there. That's the safest thing to do. I think it'll be much cheaper than hiring an attorney also.
Absolutely. Are these going to be like hourly cases, high retainers? What are we looking at without getting into details?
No, it's fine. I mean, most white collar cases are hourly because you just don't know how long they're going to take. So you can only really do them hourly. That's
but with the retainer up front or bill as you go?
Yeah, criminal lawyers always get the retainer up front, simply because once a criminal lawyer is on a case, they can't get off a case. The famous scene from The Lincoln Lawyer when Matthew McConaughey was his client in custody was trying to hold him hostage to go to trial. I highly recommend watching that scene. One of my favorites.
And it's the same for state and federal with regards to being relieved as counsel once you're on it? Yes,
it's very hard to get relieved as counsel. Yes.
Okay. So I know that we touched upon the fact that banks will not be held liable, and there's no shifting the burden, correct, to the bank for not doing their due diligence and just funding the loan?
Correct.
Okay, and the threshold was $2 million. Is that a specific guideline, or is that what's been said in all the material that's come out lately?
Yeah, the SBA has come out with that threshold and said 2 million is the trigger point. We're for sure going to audit everyone who took 2 million and up.
Wait. If you're on this program or you know somebody that's borrowed 2 million in PPP loan, you will be audited. You will be investigated.
I would, you should assume there's going to be an audit. You should assume that. Yeah. It's not for sure, but you should assume it. Don't be surprised. That's what I'm saying.
Don't be surprised.
That's what, yeah.
Okay. I have a question here. It says, what is considered payroll? Wages only? What about employment, employer taxes?
I'm not sure on that offhand. That's a good question. I think whoever asked that question, I think there's an SBA, there's like a 30-page handout that they gave on that. We should post it at the end of this, how people can read those specific detailed questions.
Okay. Do you think your forensic accountant or the CPA may know about that with regards to, are they bundling up all payroll related issues or specifically to wages?
I think the wages is really the focus of it. But you know, it's the taxes part. It's a very good question. I don't know if I don't think the government would prosecute based on that distinction.
Okay.
It just seems because it's kind of you could make the argument again. It's all under payroll, right? Payroll taxes is part of the payroll, so and the employer's out of pocket to pay them.
It's going to go back to what did you use it for? Why did you take it out? And what was your purpose? And we're going to get into this. The Rolex story. I'm going to call it the Rolex story, but we'll get into it.
Sure.
Somebody asked, are they going to care if it was used for part-time employees or full-time employees? I think the general concept that you should take away, anybody watching, is the fact that if you use it for payroll purpose, you're going to be at a safe zone, correct, Lou? Like, I'm going to be okay if I'm using it for payroll. It's when you're going to start doing other things other than payroll and business expenses where may actually trigger a conversation or two with a federal prosecutor.
Right. That's where it gets tricky.
Right.
Exactly.
I have a question here that says, I got PPP for 3 employees that won't come back. Can I hire 3 new employees and still get the forgiven part?
I think you can on that because you are funding your payroll. These are people that need to work, and it's to keep your shop open as well. So I think the argument can be made that that's okay.
Yeah, I think so too. And like just the time we did earlier. All right, Lou, the Rolex case. We're talking about Rolex, $40,000 in child support, diamond rings, jewelry. I don't know. I don't know which one to count already. I know you you saw the article from the Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, regarding the reality TV personality who's being charged with bank fraud, the catch-all phrase. Mr. Maurice Fayne, 37-year-old, is facing not only charges, but I'll have you chime into the details, but he's being charged with bank fraud. And he's made an appearance. He actually made an appearance yesterday in front of the U.S. magistrate judge. And essentially they're claiming he borrowed over $2 million, but didn't use it. Tell me more. What have you read? What do you know? And we'll take it step by step. What's going to be the defenses? I want to hear the defenses and so on and so forth. So what have you heard about Mr. Fayne? Am I saying right? Fayne?
Yeah, I mean, for this purpose, it's fine. I mean, I think what we see an individual who really took advantage of this PPP loan. Clearly, there was no company. The person makes up a company that doesn't exist, declares he has hundreds of employees. Are
you saying these as actual factual things, or you're saying this is what they're alleging he did?
Right, this is the allegation right now.
So just to be clear, this is what the prosecutors and the federal government is saying. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so the allegations are that he made up a company that doesn't exist, fabricated payroll. That's not true. And we're talking about a couple $1 million here, and he was funded. And then when he got the money, he ended up using it to. It looks like like you said, we got a Rolex watch in there, paid some $40,000, I think, in child support arrears, on personal and private possessions. In fact, it seems like the government really swooped in on him quickly. They even looked in his trash, what he threw out, and they found notes from what his plan was in the trash.
I'm going to get into that. If whether or not the feds, the police are allowed to go through your trash, we're going to get into that. Remind me definitely on that point, because that's a very interesting topic, and I know it's going to take us back to law school, Crim Law 101. But so they looked into everything. Do you think, I know it's something about the Senate came down where they can, start searching our computers without any warrants. Is that kind of what happened, or were they doing one of the procedures you talked where they were following him and they were investigating him incognito until he got caught?
Yeah, they were just following him. They just, we don't know exactly like what drew their attention. Yeah. That's unclear in their press release, but they knew pretty quick, because we're talking about within the last few weeks here, this all happened. Very fast turnaround.
do they have to show why they even started following, like in a regular case, whether this one goes forward or any ones that you anticipate coming forward? Does the prosecution have to show whether or not why they believe, like a probable cause or whatnot, or they can just have a hunch and go based off the hunch?
Well, if they're going to get warrants, they still need to have probable cause that criminal activity is afoot. But at the same time, when someone is applying for a loan, they're sort of like opening the door to their financials in a way. They're going to get audited. They're subject to an audit. It makes it very easy for the federal government to dig in these kinds of cases versus other kinds of cases where they may have to knock on your door and search your house for the contraband that they're looking for.
Right. So for the folks that are joining us, and we have about 55 views at the same time going live right now, this is about a TV reality star who was funded nearly over $2 million. And within days, he used $1.5 million from the PPP loan proceeds. And the allegations are that he bought $85,000 in jewelry, including a Rolex presidential watch, a diamond bracelet, over a 5-carat diamond ring for himself, and he paid child support. And essentially, tonight's message is, if that's the purpose of why you got the loan or to fund something else, that is not the means for this loan, and that's not why the government created it. And best practice could be is first contact Lou, see if it's returnable and what you should do to protect yourself. Not preaching that anybody's done this. I hope that nobody has done this, but if you are listening, and if you know people that might have started getting creative for this, economic downturn, this is why Lou and his colleagues have created this act and this defense coalition, I would say. We got a question in, Lou. It says, it begs the question why the PPP loan was ever given if the government won't do any pre-investigation for the company before they give it. However, they will go through trash and investigate you after you receive it. Great question. Great point.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what the government would say. The response is that a lot of people needed a lot of money very quickly, or businesses would close, employees would lose their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So the government's like, you got to pick your poison. Yeah, we didn't do our own vetting of everybody. We trusted everyone to do their own self-vetting and to do things in good faith. And if that was abused, well, we're going to come in hard and come in fast on everyone.
Wow. Now let's get to the trash component of it. Just in general practice, are cops or anybody allowed to go through your trash if it's placed on the street?
Well, yeah, because it always goes back to, when do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Right. So in our homes, due process would dictate, we all have a reasonable expectation of privacy. What we say and do in our homes is not open to the public. Once you're putting things in the trash bin outside your house, you're basically saying, look, I'm taking, the garbage man could read it, my neighbor could read it, and so forth. So yeah, and a lot of us don't think about that.
For trash, to look through your trash?
Correct. That's outside of the house. That's the warrant needs to go inside. Outside, it's kind of like, think of it as the remember the exception in law school, where you just see something right in front of you, right? The clear view exception to the warrant requirement. This is in plain view, right? The garbage is basically in plain view.
Right. But like, let me take it up a notch. Somebody has a huge front yard with gates and different measures of protection. And their trash bin is not on the street, but is inside their front yard, but the gate is open. Can somebody have a reasonable expectation of privacy for that?
Yes, if the garbage is behind the gate, even if the gate's open, there is still a reasonable expectation of privacy at that point. Okay. But outside on the street is a different scenario. And these cases have gone up to the high courts. So they're good questions.
Wonderful. Now, before I move on to one of the other hot topics that has made headlines in the media, I just want us to recap. If you can give us like maybe a 5 to 10 step recap, very short, sweet, to the point of what we discussed, why it's important, and what people should look out for.
Sure. So what we've discussed right now basically is that when someone's applying for this PPP loan, there are two parts. The first part being, is it true and accurate in terms of the payroll and if the company even exists? The second part, which is how the proceeds are being used. We foresee more prosecution on the part one versus part two. We also cover that restitution will be very important to pay it back. If someone is unsure at the present time whether they should have accepted those proceeds, they can still pay it back without prosecution. And I think that basically covers.
Lou, sorry to interrupt you, but if here I am listening to this and I'm like, and I think twice whether or not that was my intent, but circumstances changed and I want to return it back. Are they going to be able to open the door and come in and say, why did you do this? Why did you say this on your application? Isn't that kind of like creating an open gateway to coming in and questioning me?
Right, but again, you have to, pick your poison on that. When the government has said we will not prosecute people who return their money now, that means they're not going to do it.
Okay.
I mean, it's in black and white, so you can take that to the bank.
Okay, sorry, I did interrupt you. So return the
That's
money,
okay.
And then go ahead. What are the final pointers for borrowing PPP and wanting to be safeguarded?
No, and I think that it's finally, if you use the proceeds for the wrong reason, but everything you put on the application was right, I think the wrong reason could be broad. I think maybe as long as it stays within the company, I think it will just convert to a loan with 1% versus being forgiven. If it was used in Las Vegas and on just personal stuff, that would open the door probably for more prosecution.
Okay. Any final points that I've missed? Maybe I haven't asked anything that you've come across lately or can think of?
I think we did a very thorough review of the PPP loan process, and I think we've given people a lot of information to digest and be aware of. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that we've gotten these kinds of questions show how complicated it is. And if you have further questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to send you materials that really hit on the subtle points of this.
Absolutely, and I'll provide all that towards the end once the video is posted and on our feed. I know we've shared it with multiple groups, and also with regards to it'll be on YouTube, on my YouTube on Malyan Law. Lou, I want to get into a sad topic, unfortunately, and I know most of us have heard about Ahmaud Arbery, a gentleman who was shot and killed essentially by running. If I misstate anything, please correct me. I know that there are new developments on the case. I want us to first discuss who is Ahmaud Arbery, where is he from, or any details you have, and what happened. And then we'll take step by step as to what are the new developments and what defenses do you anticipate. So to begin off, who is Mr. Arbery?
Right. So Arbery is a young African-American male who in Georgia, while jogging, was shot by two people that supposedly were trying to make a citizen's arrest. And sadly, he was killed in the process. And this was back on February 23rd. There was a delay in terms of the filing of charges because one of the people that were involved, there was a father and son. Father actually had worked for the local district attorney's office. So there was a conflict issue as well, which agency would and could handle this case. And it seems like when there was a video released of the actual shooting just about a week ago or so, that really brought on the pressure on the local prosecutor's office to do something about this.
What was the concern about being involved with the DA's office?
Well, it's just it's a conflict. The fact that you have an employee of the office that is potentially prosecuting the case, there's a fear that that employee would get maybe some kind of favorable preferential treatment for being an employee of the prosecutor's office. So it needs to go to the attorney general's office, let's say a different prosecutorial agency to handle it.
Do you believe that was the reason why this made the headlines? I mean, you're talking about, or is it, I mean, a racial issue? Like, why is this news?
It was brought up on February 23rd when this first happened. It did make some news, but it really came to the forefront when the video was released just about a week ago.
What's the video?
Which actually,
what video are you talking about?
So the video actually, someone took it. It shows the actual shooting occur of this man. So that's when everyone watches the video and they go, oh my God, it's clear as day to me that you have an unarmed, person jogging and two other people who are white that are armed. Why are they bothering this guy? Why are they, what business do they have going up to him even and then shooting him? It just created an outrage that there had been no prosecution up until that point. But shortly after the video was released, it was almost with like the next day, almost that their charges are being brought.
Okay, what charges are being brought? Do you know?
Yeah, murder charges have been brought.
Like first degree, second degree. Is there a difference?
I'm not sure, George. I mean, the fact is, it's an intentional killing of another. So I presume they're looking at 20 to life under that scheme. Yeah.
But I mean, let's get a little deeper into it. Aren't they going to argue self-defense? What are your thoughts about that? And what defenses do you anticipate?
So here's where we see this going a little bit. So subsequent to that video, another video was released, which shows Arbery in a construction site, basically. Maybe it's a residential house of some sort. So the defendants now, they're claiming that the reason why they went over to Arbery to begin with is because that he fit the description of someone who was burglarizing houses in that area. So they took it upon themselves to effectuate what's called a citizen's arrest. A citizen's arrest is one of these age-old schemes. You don't hear about it much, but what it basically means is that you can arrest, you can be like a police officer. You can arrest somebody without the police being there, so long as you have a probable cause type of suspicion that they committed a felony. Even if they didn't do the felony in your presence, you can still arrest them.
So I think that's a bad episode of good cops versus bad cops that might have gone bad, right? So they took citizen's arrest to an extreme and they shot the guy. Right.
So, but Arbery's lawyers are saying, wait a second, just because you have a video of him at a construction site, that doesn't rise to the standard of probable cause for you guys to make an arrest. Right.
Citizens arrest means lock me down, throw me on the ground, whatever the bad cop, good cop you want to play, handcuff me or tie me up with a string, but doesn't mean shoot me. That's not citizen's arrest, is it?
Right. So here's where it gets gray, right? They would argue it got gray. If you're on the defense, you'd say, well, okay, so they're trying to make a citizen's arrest, which to them, it seems okay. It seems, valid on his face. They hear about burglaries. This person, because remember, we don't know their side of the story, but this is where they may go. They'll say this person somehow fit the description. They were making a citizen's arrest. They didn't mean to shoot him. And then when they approached him to make the citizen's arrest, Arbery then, attacked them. So they're going to say they only shot to defend themselves against Arbery attacking them when they made the citizen's arrest. So a lot of this is going to come down to, was that citizen's arrest even valid to begin with? If there was no underlying validity to the citizen's arrest, they really have nowhere to go here.
Do you think there's other alternative motives under the guise of citizen's arrest?
Well, the prosecution may argue that this is a hate crime, and in fact, they're trying to get the federal Department of Justice to come in and take over the case to make it into a hate crime case.
Oh, okay.
Because hate crimes are prosecuted they're generally prosecuted federally.
Okay.
State.
So, but let me ask you this question, and this kind of goes to our regular rights as citizens, as ourselves. If it is hypothetically true that they were exercising self-defense, shouldn't they find a gun on Arbery as well in order for them to win on the argument that it is self-defense, because they shot the guy, right?
Right.
What should we know about self-defense? Can I swing at you or a person and be shot? Is that self-defense?
So the answer is no. Self-defense, you're only permitted to use a reasonable amount of force, which is basically equal to the force that someone is using against you. But that's not to say that you can only use a gun if someone else has a gun. I mean, sometimes, let's say the person is twice your size and he's cornered you in a corner and he has the ability to kill you with his fist. You would be permitted to use a gun even though he's unarmed, right? But here you have a situation, right, where you have 2 against 1, one being unarmed, right? 2 being, at least one of the 2 being armed. Why bring a gun into the situation to begin with? Why play cop at that point?
Wow.
It's going to be a tough one if you're on the defense on this case. Very difficult.
Any anticipated defenses that we haven't talked about?
No, I mean, self-defense is the only way to go, and that's probably what they're going to do. Unless there maybe the death penalty is on the table, in which case they may take a deal just to avoid that possibility, if that's where it goes. Otherwise, it'll go to trial.
What state is this again? What state did he get shot?
In Georgia.
Georgia, and they still have the death penalty as one of the sentencing or rulings?
I believe it's still valid there.
Wow, very interesting, Lou, very interesting. Have we touched upon everything that we anticipated to cover for tonight?
I think we did pretty good for an hour, yes.
Yeah, so I know your time is valuable, and I definitely want to respect our time, and I promised you 60 minutes, so we are 60 minutes later. I do want to thank everybody who has joined in, asked questions, volunteered, commented. I really hope you guys are enjoying these programs. I intend to do a couple more. Next week, I will have a bankruptcy attorney to do some myth busters as to why bankruptcy is not always the best case, or it's not always the worst case scenario. Like, your life isn't over just because you file bankruptcy, along with a tax attorney to discuss some new developments, followed by another criminal law attorney to talk about safe practices and what cops may or may not do. With that said, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Lou. Thank you so much for taking the time and volunteering to do this for our community, our Facebook family and friends, and whoever gets to view this. I want to wish everybody a safe and healthy week. Thank you so much, Lou, and I wish you a wonderful night.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Give me 1 second.